Robin Zander, scene A1.
Hello and welcome back to Snafu. I'm Robin Zander, and normally I interview authors, executives, and founders about non-sales selling. Today, it's a little bit different because I am the guest on my friend Andrew Bartlow's new podcast, The People Leader Accelerator. He and his co-host, Jess Yoon, interview HR executives about the changing world of work. This is particularly sweet for me because years ago, Zander Media had the pleasure of helping to brand People Leader Accelerator, an HR accelerator that they were just launching back in about 2021. We talk about company culture, the rise of HR technology, and influence and politics at work, what executives can do to sell themselves and to get ahead. I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with today's guest, Robin Zander, on the People Leader Accelerator podcast.
Robin, are those flags behind you? Swim towels? What is that?
So this is my mother's artwork. My mother, I often think of myself as like squarely halfway in between my mother and my father's career. My dad built an environmental consulting firm to, I don't think they were 25 or so employees in their heyday. My mother, meanwhile, has been a practicing artist for longer than I've been alive. So these are Moroccan textiles that she has turned into, these are about 6 foot long paintings, maybe about a foot wide, behind me. And it's doubly sweet now. My mother and my father and I visited Morocco for 5 weeks in 2017, but my fiance is Moroccan. And so these now have a double meaning because they are made by my mother, but independent of that, also of my fiance's home country.
That's really
Fantastic.
great. And all the connections, all the deep emotional connections there. This is a storytelling discussion.
I've been interested, this is a tangent, but fascinated by Morocco pretty much my whole life, which I was really embarrassed to share with my then girlfriend, now fiance, for maybe the first 3 months that we were together because we met online. That was not really relevant in our relationship. And I felt like maybe she thought I was particularly interested in her because of her heritage. She moved to the US at 20 is a citizen. And I watched Lawrence of Arabia when I was like, which is I think like a 4 hour movie when I was probably 6 or 7, and got obsessed with like camels and the Sahara and the adventure and the storytelling and the persuasive ability of Lawrence of Arabia to move people towards a common vision, right? That's really what that movie is all about, and that's the story of his life is coalition building during World War I. And so I think even though it's maybe looking backwards to tell the reasons why, but a lot of what I do today is driven by a lifelong fascination by persuasion.
We need to unpack this for the audience.
I know. And also at 6, did you sit through all 4 hours?
Not only that, it's worse. It's worse, Jess. Do you prefer Jess or Jessica?
Jess.
Jess.
I used to introduce myself as Jessica, but then everybody would
And everyone
eventually
calls you
shorten it to
Jessica.
Jess, right? Because we know each other long enough. We need it, it goes casual. And I just now assume that everybody I meet, I will know for long enough that we will
Nice.
get to the Jess stage. So I just
Oh,
start there.
that's
Uh,
nice.
See, I go the other direction where because my business is Zander Media and I have this awkward habit of naming businesses after myself, a lot of clients, a lot of people I know in a professional context know me as Zander, which I hadn't been called Zander since high school until I started Zander Media in 2018. And I don't mind. I'm happy to like anything but Robin Hood works. Um, but it's worse than watching that movie for 4 hours, which, by the way, it starts with him dying on a motorcycle, right? Like that's where the movie starts. Like it's not a light movie. If somebody dies by drowning in quicksand, like it's not a light movie for any age. Um, I threw whatever it was my 6th or maybe 7th birthday party and played the entirety of the movie at the sleepover overnight for the birthday party.
Oh
I
my
don't know how
God.
my parents, we didn't have a TV. This was, I'm going to date myself to anyone listening and watching, but like we didn't have a television growing up. So when we would have the special occasion of watching television, we would go out and rent a VCR, rent a television, and rent the cassette tape. And so we did that and played Lawrence of Arabia on my, seventh or eighth birthday party.
That's incredible. And did your friend, were your
Jess is
friends as
speechless.
into it as you were?
No, I think
No.
they never came back to it. No, thus followed 10 years of being ostracized. I've never quite put these pieces together before, but like there may have been a connection there.
Oh, oh my gosh. Now, yeah, we are now diving back into all the childhood, all the childhood traumas.
I'm trying to come up with something to follow that or to empathize with that, and I don't have. I'm coming up dry, Robin. I'm coming up dry. I've been hosting my girls' birthday parties, so my girls just turned 10 and 12 respectively. This one's 12, this one's 10, and they are all into screens. And they have very strong opinions about what they want to watch and what they connect with. And the Christmas present is now the charm bracelet from the summer that I turned pretty. And yeah, there's a lot going on with the childhood things for sure. Jess is in the midst of all this.
I am. Well,
Couple of
my
years
little
earlier.
one is about the age that you mentioned watching Lawrence of Arabia for the first time. I'm just trying to imagine him sitting through that and having a very hard time imagining. So I'm like, that's incredible that it like, captured you so vividly at that age.
Well, we'll have to find a way to make sure that we are able to share some of this backstory with our audience and our listeners. Um, Robin, I'd love to transition more into our discussion for the audience. Um, really appreciate you being willing to chat with us. I've been on your podcast, and now you're on ours. I feel really honored, and Robin, really that discussion that you and I had in your offices at Zander Media in Oakland, Berkeley border was one of the deeper, more introspective conversations that I've ever had in any venue. I mean, really dialed into what makes you tick, why are you the way you are, talked about childhood and family and all of that, and as I reflected on as Jess and I were talking about guests for the pod, that sort of storytelling arc that you have been so strong at through a variety of careers and evolutions, I wanted to bring that to our audience of mid to senior level HR leaders. So much, my opinion, so much of our opportunity is to tell our story more effectively. How
Yep.
do we contribute? How is what we're working on in people programs and initiatives tied to driving more revenue or the product getting out the door? And that's often to an audience that doesn't really understand how we tick and how we can contribute. So I really appreciate you being willing to speak with us. Maybe a few more words of intro. I've known you at least adjacently since oh boy, call it almost 10 years. I remember watching you carry a camera and a mic and wearing those same big headphones that you are right now, recording People Tech Partners events and activities. And so it was through People Tech that Jess and I first met each other. You have been deeply involved in the People Tech community for a long time. You've been HR adjacent in many ways and tech native in many ways. And you created the first People Leader Accelerator website and our logo and our branding. And so, like, you are truly part of the genesis story of PLA. And so now, full circle, we have a venue here and you're on it. And thank you so much for being part of it. And I really did not realize until just a few minutes ago that you and Jess had never met.
I know, it's so crazy. I was like, I kind of feel like Robin and I know each other because we've been adjacent in these circles for so long. So it's a pleasure to finally be able to directly be chatting with you. And in preparation for this, I was going through your LinkedIn and your website and going through your backstory. I watched the YouTube video about the cafe that you bought and later subsequently sold after 3 years of turning it around. And it's just so many aspects to you that are fantastic, and I can't wait to dive in, including like you worked with BJ Fogg, who does a lot of behavioral change. Dance is a big part of your life as well. And so talking about both for how storytelling applies for HR leaders was the original impetus where Andrew and I were super excited to talk to you, but I'm sure some of these other facets will come up through our conversation as well.
Very sweet. No, this is such a joy. It's fun. You both mentioned sort of these like what I think of as professional dilettante elements of my life. We all have so many multifaceted components. And one of the things I struggled with in my throughout my 20s, really, I'm 39 today, uh, is how to weave together the different facets of ourselves. And what I've essentially come to is without being inauthentic, it's who are we trying to talk to and what are the stories we're trying to share to achieve the thing that we want, right? So, like, dance and HR don't have a lot in common for me in my life, right? HR and Zander Media, like I'm just a fan of, everybody I know who is in HR. There are a lot of, professional dilettantes, people who did not grow up. Like there's very few traditional routes to becoming an HR professional. All of my favorite CPOs, CHROs are people who found their way, right? We both all of us know Marie in common, right? As a staff member and a co-producer of People Leader Accelerator. Marie was a professional musician long before she was an HR executive, right? We all have these multiple facets. The best of people in the world pull from one domain of expertise, very David Epstein's range, pull from one domain and apply it into another. And so, whether it's storytelling or influence or persuasion that we're talking about, I think that ability to, like, Andrew, what you did telling the story of your daughter and tying it back to Lawrence of Arabia and
Hmm.
to attention, right? Storytelling is pulling from one domain that is personal to me and contextualizing it so it's personal to the other person to foster connection, which then means we can move together in the same direction. And that's so much of what executives and leaders need to do is to coalition build, is to generate momentum, right? To not just say we're going to move in this
Yeah.
direction, but to generate the case for why people should move in that direction.
Connection. Well, we in HR often spend a lot of time and energy talking about connection and relationships. Um, I might take a slightly different spin on it about alignment and clarity helps organizations and teams move faster.
Yep.
And so telling the story about what are we trying to accomplish together, what are the key things that it takes to get there, can help organizations, put grease in the wheels instead of sand, can move together, as you said, more rapidly. Well, let's dive deeper in this conversation around storytelling, and actually, before we do that, would love to give you the opportunity to like tee it up for the audience. Not everybody knows the full journey. We've alluded to many elements, and there's a lot to touch on. But maybe you could focus, Robin, on help our audience like share your points of credibility about why they should listen to you about how to storytell.
I mean, I think that when it comes to storytelling, the thing to do is to practice more than to listen to anybody. But
Mm.
in terms of my experience, I've been a full-time entrepreneur for 15 years. Um, my very first business was at 5 years old, selling pumpkins throughout the neighborhood, building coalitions of the local boys to dress up in scarecrow costumes and flag down passing cars to buy Robin's pumpkins. I did not pay them. It was very, Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn. This will be fun. Let's dress up and market for my pumpkins. Never have I ever felt more wealthy than at, I think I was probably 6 years old, and that first year made $500 from
Oh my
selling
goodness.
pumpkins. And like nothing
$500.
I will
That is
ever
quite
do.
the haul for
Yeah.
how many pumpkins were you
A lot. Oh
selling?
yeah,
Oh
yeah,
my
yeah. A lot of
gosh.
pumpkins. Which, my dad and I grew. My dad had me plant the seeds and then I nurtured them for very, very many months and grew the plants and then set out the pumpkins. Um, but just like, I don't think I will ever be as successful as I was at 6 years old selling $500 worth of pumpkins in a season. Um, I walked into a gymnastics gym at 19 and discovered a love of movement and gymnastics. Went on to have a career as a gymnast, performed as an acrobat with the San Francisco Opera for a season. As you said, Jess, in 2016, bought used restaurant equipment and opened up Robin's Cafe in the Mission District in San Francisco with no prior restaurant experience. Uh, Started it on 3 weeks' notice in time to feed attendees of a conference I was putting on alongside BJ Fogg on this intersection of dance and behavior change. As some, that was the connection. It was housed within a
Mm.
dance studio. I had been a dancer then professionally for many years, um, and uh, I lived in that neighborhood for 10 years and knew that that neighborhood was changing and that that specific corner would benefit from a coffee shop. It's still around today. It's still called Robin's Cafe. The folks I sold it to in 2019, who I met via Craigslist, still run it today. And credit where due, they have run it many years longer than I ever did. But it was very much a testing ground for me. It was the first time I had full-time employees of my own. It was the first time I built a team that I was ultimately responsible for. Um, I like food, but I've discovered that I prefer to make lattes for my fiance in the morning rather than sell lattes and try to make my margins selling $3 lattes in San Francisco.
That'd be a
Um,
bargain today. $3 latte.
Yeah. It's
You'd
like
have
you could
lines
double or
around the
triple
block.
that
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
might have been $4. I don't remember exactly now, but uh, when you're trying to make your margins on 25 cents, it's a rough business. But it taught me a lot about, as we're saying, coalition building, right? Generating momentum across a team, getting all of the different stakeholders of a business and of an ecosystem to buy into a common vision and work hard towards that common vision.
Mm.
Um, and when I sold the cafe, realized I had made a mistake. I had an oh shoot moment 3 weeks after selling the restaurant. And it wasn't that I wish I had kept the restaurant. I've never regretted leaving that business, but that I didn't do enough storytelling. Because if I could show you the video in this moment of the first time my nephew walked in and his eyes got big because his big uncle Robin owned a soft serve machine, or if I could show you the stories of all of the customers who developed a deep rapport with my baristas because I did a good enough job developing a sense of community behind the counter that my baristas were able to develop this community with our customers and our customers grew the community and thus Robin's Cafe was successful. Those are the videos that would have been great marketing for Robin's Cafe. And I was so busy cleaning espresso drains and hiring and firing baristas that I was not able to take the time, even though I knew at the time Jonathan Kofel, who's on my team at Zander Media and who Andrew, uh, we collaborated. I knew Pomona, who is the designer who did the PLA website and brand design when Zander Media helped PLA kind of get off the ground as a visual brand. I was so busy running the business that I did not do the storytelling that would have catapulted Robin's Cafe while successful already to the next level. And I said, okay, whatever I go and do next, I want to make sure I have the capacity to storytell where people pay attention right now, which is always changing, on the platforms where people are existing, which will always continue to change. Let me go figure out storytelling. Let me go figure out messaging and content building. And so that's what became Zander Media. And we're a small but mighty team today, kind of distributed around the US and mostly do narrative strategy and video production. Um, yeah, so
And
that's
yeah,
a
let's unpack that a little bit more. So Xander Media has been around for how long now?
2018.
And
2018.
20, yeah. So we're at 7, 8 years at this point, and I know that you have done a lot of work with venture-backed tech companies and a lot of work with HR teams who are trying to tell their story to candidates and tell
Yep.
their story internally to these high growth organizations. And so, boy, talk about getting the reps and then going deep in the storytelling. Like that's one of the things I love about People Leader Accelerator. I think of myself as a generalist where I can talk a decent amount about a lot of different topics, but we're able to connect with true world class experts in a subject matter. And that's what I think you are in terms of storytelling in this space, in startup land, in the HR land. And I would love for our listeners to be able to come away with some some golden nuggets about how to do this inside their organizations more effectively.
Yeah, and I love how you're drawing the connection between this idea of connecting with others and alignment, and that being able to allow organizations to move faster, and that storytelling is this really powerful form of connection. If we might start with something super basic, what what is a good story, right? Like what are the core components? I've worked with a lot of executive clients where they're like, I think I need to get better at storytelling. Like they just sort of have this sense like it's a skill I need to know, but they don't really need to know the why. And I think we're unpacking a bit of that. But then the next question is naturally like, how, like, where do I start with that if I want to get better at it? And so maybe if we just start with what is a story? What makes a good one?
Totally. Um, there's lots and lots of frameworks, and we'll talk about a couple of different frameworks. Um, but ultimately, frameworks are condensed out of what humans already do. Humans want to be educated, they want to be entertained, they want attention, they want to continue paying attention because otherwise, they're drifting off and looking at TikTok. We've all heard about the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, which, depending on the read, has something like 17 steps. Dan Harmon's 8-part story structure is another, right? It's another version of the hero's journey. But any story kind of has 3 parts. It has a departure, a challenge, and a return. I like to think of story in 4 parts, and I'll give a couple of examples. Um, I had a credit where due conversation with a Pixar animator named Bobby Podesta, and he gave me this story, but it just works so well. So Steve Jobs was launching the second iPod. I think it was the iPod Nano, something like that. And he's spending, this big long buildup talking about why Apple is well positioned for the iPod Nano. You can find this YouTube video from back in the day. And he's saying, Apple owns this percentage of the market, and here how our competitors in the MP3 space are doing compared to our first iPod, and now we're getting ready to introduce something new. And here he had the option of doing 2 different things. He could just pull out the new device and say, here it is. But instead, he paused and he was like, I have a question. I've always wondered what that little pocket on jeans, that little jean. I'm wearing Carhartts, but we can pretend the little pocket on jeans that holds coins. It's like coin sized. I've always wondered what that's for. Do you know what that's for? Well, here at Apple, we've just discovered what that's for. And he, out of that little pocket, pulls out the iPod Nano. And he's like, introducing the second iPod in the Apple family. It's the size of, a quarter. Here is the new device. And that moment, that twist or reveal, which we can call the turning, is a moment of entertainment and disruption that can make or break a story. It makes it memorable. It brings it to a pause that's really exciting. So if I were to another story, if I were to say I was running Robin's Cafe, I wanted to do more marketing. Now I'm running Zander Media. It's like kind of falls flat. It's like, sure, okay, but no one's going to remember that. It's not interesting. If I say I was running Robin's Cafe, I wanted to do more marketing. So I sold my cafe on Craigslist, and now my business today is Zander Media. That is, I don't know, substantially more interesting as a narrative arc. And so this 4-part is the setup, right? Something in the world. This is the world we find ourselves in. Bilbo Baggins is in the Shire. There's a change. Something new disrupts that norm. So Gandalf comes and brings Bilbo out of the Shire. There's a turning, right? The twist or the reveal, which is the one ring, right? Bilbo finds the ring. And then there's a resolution, which is the payoff or conclusion of the story. Eventually Bilbo returns to the Shire. And so it's less about trying to fit a story to a framework and more looking at the stories we already tell, looking at the things that we're already doing and say, what here helps move the story that we have to tell or the coalition that we're trying to build into that little bit of excitement, into that little bit of a flow, into a start somewhere. There's something that happens that disrupts the norm. There's a surprise or a delight or a moment of aha, and then there's this resolution, this conclusion, this payoff.
I appreciate the like that there are so many frameworks to use, but that you've distilled it down into here's the three things, but oh, by the way, this twist is critical to making a story sticky.
Yep.
For HR leaders who are thinking about using storytelling within their organizations, what are some of the ways that they can decide what are the best ways to tell those stories? Because storytelling can take so many forms, they can have so many elements to it. How do you think about like what are the best mediums? What are the best forms of these stories?
Yeah, I have sort of two different directions to go with that, so I'll tackle both. And the first is we will sometimes do employer brand videos, employer brand strategy, and then turn that into a video for HR departments or enterprise companies at large. And what I always tell clients or potential clients at the beginning is your employer brand is not different than your brand. This should be a conversation between marketing and HR because your employer brand, people go and work at Nike because Nike has a really strong brand. People go and work at Apple because Apple has a really strong brand. They are known for who they are. They're known for who they're not. You don't go to Apple and say, but I would like to work remote because everybody knows Apple is generally an office first company. And so that the more true and authentic an employer can be about who they are and also who they're not, who they're for and who they're not for, and more cleanly adhere to the ethos of the company itself, the more successful they will be at attracting the right people and retaining the right people. So that's at the meta level. At the micro level for an individual, it's just practice, right? There's no such thing as an inherently good storyteller or an inherently bad storyteller. There's what I always tell, what I call it your founder story, but it can be the founder story for Andrew of starting PLA. It can be the founder story of your career, right? It doesn't have to be the founder of a startup. Is what are the 15 stories you can tell, right? And have you practiced them? And have you noticed that when you pause at that specific moment, like a comedian, people take an indrawn breath, right? This is a skill to practice, not something that you are inherently good at or bad at. It's just getting practice, getting reps in the same way that we would expect the recruiting arm of a company get reps at talking about how good that company is and why you should come and work for them.
I wonder if there's some specific, practical, tangible guidance that we could offer to some of our, HR listeners. You touched on employment branding, storytelling, and a partnership with marketing. And I'll share that I've taken a cynic's opinionated view on this in the past, and I've encouraged uh, other HR leaders to make sure marketing stays away from, yeah, like make the graphics, they'll be beautiful, but don't let marketing take control of the
Oh, I agree
internal
with that.
messaging.
I agree with that.
Yeah, let's share a little bit more of the nuance of that. So I've got my perspective on it, but what's yours?
So, marketing, whether we're marketing, right, marketing writ large, whether we're trying to hire the right people, retain the right people, or attract the right customers, is a mix of what is authentically true to an organization and what is aspirationally true to the
Hmm.
organization, right? It doesn't have, I'm sure there are lots of employees at Apple who work remote. And the folks I know at Apple who have been hired in the last 2 years have been required to go to HQ or to go to the office, right? So there's always exceptions. There's always, we're not only trying to attract one specific person or one specific type of person. Um, I do think it should be a collaboration with marketing, but only if marketing is willing to take HR's lead because HR has a much better sense of who they are trying to attract than a marketing arm that is only used to whatever, bringing in B2B customers at the enterprise level, right? They know nothing
Very
about
right.
attracting great employees. So then that's on them to learn, right? And the danger is because marketing often holds more power, especially around messaging, than HR does. I actually think HR leaders need to step up and say, we know who we are, both in actuality and in aspirational. And this is the kind of people we're trying to attract. And this is the story we want to tell,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
the more I've gotten to know, I was just saying this to a friend who's a senior product guy at Asana, who I've known for probably 15 years. And we were reflecting on the higher up somebody gets within a large enterprise company, the more they become a politician and the more they become responsible for coalition building. That's actually a large part of the role of a leader in any company. At Robin's Cafe with 15 baristas, some of whom are full-time, some of whom are part-time, all the way to, Intel with tens of thousands, right? Whatever it
Yeah.
is, 90,000 employees around the world. Not, sorry,
Mobilizing
900.
many
Yeah,
employees.
90,000, I believe, something in that range.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, mobilizing people, building momentum. Um, and it comes from recognizing the responsibility for not trying to do something alone, right? I mean, what you said of we both known lots of HR leaders, Andrew, whose ability to storytell was curtailed by the marketing department, rather than say,
Yeah.
we know who we're trying to attract. Let's work with the people who do messaging all the time to figure out what the messages we want to tell about our organization to prospective employees.
I'll double down and plus 100 that. Um, as you think about ideal customer profile or ICP, your marketing team should have that really dialed in for your product or your service of your business. The ICP, though, of prospective workers at your company or current workers is probably a little outside their normal lane. It's like asking your general counsel that has done deals and contracts, employment law stuff. It's different. It's still legal stuff, but it's very different. So it's still marketing, but your ICP and your messaging and what you're going to talk about that's compelling to them is very different. And so HR should be much more closely attuned, and so that's where I come from when I say, like, hey, don't let marketing own your internal messaging. Sure, you can work with them, but we in HR should be much more attuned to what attracts, what retains, what helps build alignment and clarity. And often I find that a lot of our internal communications kind of default to tasteless vanilla, like something that appeals to everybody and is kind of corporate speak, and we all roll our eyes at words like synergy and the corporate speak that happens a lot, and we can say a lot without actually saying anything. And so any type of internal messaging, I think, that's effective will be somewhat opinionated and repel just as much as it attracts, if it's going to be effective, which is, a bit of a spicy take.
And I think that's true of marketing writ large outside of HR as well, right? I think my spicy take on marketing is every organization should be 30% more true to who they actually are, including the things they do poorly. There's a great book, The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, and the old version is better than the new. I think the first edition is the best. But things like, budget cars came around as a competitor because they said, we're cheaper because we're the new kid on the block, right? Southwest Airlines, right, was like 2 free checked bags. Uh, Unlike all of our competitors, we're the cheaper option with free refunds. Uh, and that when an organization adheres to the truth of the organization, right? It might not arrive as fast as we say it will, but we're gonna make it up to you by lowering our prices or whatever the thing is. Marketing, messaging, storytelling is, as I said before, a mix of the truth of an organization or a deliverable plus the aspirational truth, right? Not a lie, but we're trying to become this, right? And then all of a sudden it becomes compelling because join my company, we're going to become greater than we are now, right? It gives forward momentum.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those opinions, the spiciness that we're adding here is that those opinions give it personality, and personality allows it to be sticky. And that stickiness then
Mhm.
stays in our brains, and we go, oh, that's why Apple has a reputation for being a certain way. Or, we connect the types of products with the culture of the company, with what it's like to work there. And I remember at Gusto, our CEO was really, really intentional about, I want it to feel consistent, whether a customer is using our product, calling into customer support, or dealing with the salesperson, or coming into one of our offices, or getting interviewed. It should feel consistent. And while it's not identical, there is this translation that we're trying to do between the brand of the company and the employer brand of the company that should feel connected. They should not feel divorced. And I think that's where, yes, partner with marketing, but don't let them take over is this interesting balance, because you're both sides, I think, are trying to meet somewhere that feels connected ultimately.
We're all inundated with so much AI generated content now, whether video or written, that the authenticity of a brand, humans already have a very acute sense of what is inauthentic. And so, in some ways, one of the only competitive advantages left, whether for an individual or a company, is be true to the truth of that organization or of that person.
I'm curious if we could follow that like AI thread for a moment too, of what are some of the signals that make us, whether it's a video or a story, feel inauthentic, or like sort of those flags where you go, ooh, to a human that feels really AI generated.
I think about this in books and book publishing. I self published two books in the 20 teens. I have another book proposal that I'm circulating right now. And in books, we're already seeing in the last couple of years a decrease of great books, but the ones that stay because there's so much content. Because I can ask ChatGPT to write me a book in 10 minutes on any topic I could name. But what it can't do is the personalization. It can't tell you a really compelling story of why Lawrence of Arabia matters to me or what it was like to grow into myself as a man through running Robin's Cafe, right? It's the personalness of my experience, the story or the lesson learned, and then how it applies to you or how it applies to our connection or how it applies to our conversation. And so the books that I think are going to do well in the next 10 years are ones that have vulnerability, have personal story, and also have relevance to a specific reader. And so content, story, right?
Mhm.
The story of your career, Jess, right? Has the personal relevance, the relevance to me or to whoever you're talking to, and the outcome, the entertainment, the education, the where we're going together.
And I appreciate that so much. And the vulnerability element, I'm curious about, is there a line at which you can be, as a leader, right? Like too personal, too vulnerable, where it backfires? And how do you
Sure.
think about that balance between, yes, we want that authenticity and we want people to be able to connect with you, but when does it undermine you as a leader in that kind of, yeah, reversing it being a strength and suddenly becomes like, oh, does it ever get too vulnerable?
100%. I don't think I have all the answers on that. I just have my own personal experience. Um, but you know who you clearly should have on the podcast, who just wrote the title of her book is Be Yourself at Work, is the chief heart officer, the CHRO at VaynerMedia, Claude Silver. So if you don't know Claude, I'm happy to make the intro. I assume you do. She's been leading
I
for
know
Gary.
of her, but
Okay.
I don't know her personally, so would love the
Yeah,
introduction.
I know I have a copy of that book coming to me. I haven't read it yet. It just came out very recently, last week or the week before. Um, but I don't know the answer to that. I will answer fairly vulnerably with a couple of like personal anecdotes. Um, I remember at Robin's Cafe, we would often, maybe once a month, we would do like a bowling night. There's a bowling alley across the street from the cafe, and they were friends, so they would host us. And we would do some like training with my baristas after the cafe closed and then go across the street. And I don't remember what I was talking about to 7 or 8 employees who were there, but I was giving kind of an inspirational couple of minute speech about the purpose. And then we were going to do some training. And one of my employees at the end of the speech wasn't particularly bought in and said something kind of like, snide and just like, I don't agree. Right? Not kindly, but not offensively. And I just remember the wind being completely, I was like, here we are, and here we're doing this thing. And then he was like, no, you're wrong. Right? Or that's right. And I just completely deflated. And there's no real conclusion to that other than I just remember for the next while feeling like, oh, maybe I was right, doubting myself. Right. Flash forward to Zander Media, I had many more, not more employees, but full-time employees with healthcare benefits, running a media agency with the margins being very different and the like salaries being very, very different than food service. And uh in sort of in 21 and 22, I started to have a couple of different challenges with employees. We hired, I think, 10 people over the course of a year, all full time, based on just the work that Xandr Media was doing. A couple of those were not good fit hires. They came from large enterprise companies and expected sort of the benefits that they would get at a thousands of person company. Um, One of them left after a very short period of time, and there was a lot of challenge around the departure. And I was talking to actually Joe Dennis, who's the former CHRO of Pinterest, who was a neighbor of mine at the time. Um, I'd walk by her house on my daily run, and we would catch up, and I was sharing some of these challenges. She was like, oh, Davey, is this your, I mean, probably not her exact word, but, oh, is this your first challenge of that kind? Like, is this the first time you've had a disgruntled employee leave and then, like there's continued kerfuffle around it? Like, I remember my first time too. That's very sweet, right? Because at Pinterest, like, God only knows how many lawsuits and, settlements and, right? Because when you get to a certain size, there become conflict. And I just didn't know at Robin's Cafe when I'm like doing my best to be an inspirational leader that someone's going to disagree, or doing my best to hire great people and to treat them. I mean, the first time at Xandr Media we got employees healthcare, I was like, I've made it. Like, and I talked to my colleague to this day, Jonathan, a year after we got everyone healthcare, and he was like, Robin, this is like really not great healthcare benefits. I'm just, this is good enough for now, and then hopefully it'll continue to improve, right? There are these moments of like, I'm trying, setback, trying and trying and setback. And then you get someone like Joe saying, actually, Robin, like, I have empathy for your setback, but like, that just means you've reached the next level. I've heard business leaders say, like, until you've gotten sued, you don't even, you're not even becoming successful, right? There's always the Paul Farmer quote, who did so much incredible work in Haiti in medicine. There's this Haitian quote that he quotes that is mountains beyond mountains, meaning like beyond the mountain you're climbing, there are always bigger mountains to climb. And that's I just think about that with entrepreneurship or with climbing an executive ladder or building a company of any kind. There's always hurdles, and the ones that we tackle right now will help us be better at the ones that are coming next.
Robin, I wonder if there's a lesson to be learned. Here, let me set this up. So we've had a number of conversations with, guests on this podcast about how HR leaders can be more successful. Part of that is about being more business oriented. Part of that is knowing how to show up in a room of your, I'm going to put air quotes up, air quote peers on the executive team. And this might be more about executive communication rather than storytelling, but take this whatever direction that you want. Often the HR leader is the youngest, is the earliest in their career, might be the only or one of the only females, might be the only or one of the only members of a different demographic group around a table of the executive team. And there is this feeling of anxiousness showing up within that peer group. I'm curious, given the conversation that we just had about like the mountain after the mountain, like congratulations, you're now at the executive table, and it doesn't feel great, and there's some challenges that you're facing. Um, from your perspective of communications and storytelling, what advice would you have to HR leaders that find themselves in that situation of, how can they be most successful?
Yeah. I mean, I'm still thinking about your question, how authentic is too authentic to be at work? And based on the title of her book, which I love Claude dearly, I haven't read her book yet, right? Be yourself at work is her advice. Um, I'm thinking about another CPO of Athena, who I think Andrew, you know, and maybe
Melanie
Melanie, yeah,
Melanie,
we
came
we
no,
had
on, and her
we had
spicy
this.
take was just
Yep.
exactly the opposite, right? Don't be yourself. Don't bring your
well,
whole self to work. Only bring parts of yourself to
and
work.
I would love, maybe we'll try and organize this at the next responsive conference. Melanie and Claude having that debate would be like the best in the world. But but Melanie, right, and to be very clear, I'm not a woman, I'm not an HR professional. Um, I'm not at that executive table for the first time in that position. So I really don't know. It's not an experience I've had. But Melanie is short. She is feisty. She has come up in HR. She is unafraid to have spicy takes on the internet. She has done such an amazing. She was on stage last year in 2024, my annual responsive conference, my conference about the future of work. And she puts opinions out there on the internet that are spicy. And I've also seen her acknowledge quite authentically and humbly when she changes her mind about something or is proven wrong, right? So there's a willingness to take risks. I actually think that almost any circumstance can be turned into a competitive advantage. So if I'm coming to the boardroom or coming to the executive table for the first time, I'm going to say, "Hey, look, I've never done this before and I'm a little intimidated, and I know that I could be great. So please give me feedback, but also like I'm here, and until I'm no longer welcome at this table, I'm gonna try to make my voice heard,
I'm
right?
hearing authenticity there. I'm hearing own it, name it. This
Because what else are
feels
you gonna
weird,
do?
gang. And I'm doing my best, and be a great teammate. Like, help us all do this well.
And I'm not one to say that there's not consequences to that. Simon Loudon, who is I feel like I'm name dropping a little bit, and I don't mean to be, at Responsive Conference 2017. The Simon Loudon was the global CMO of PepsiCo at the time, and he was on stage talking about org transformation at PepsiCo, one of the largest organizations in the world. Um, and they were really embracing these sort of responsive, resilient principles of how to change the shape of their organization. And somebody during the Q&A raised his hand from the audience and said, "This sounds great, and I love that you're on stage with your direct report talking about org change. I'm at an enterprise company in the world, and my boss's boss doesn't want change for our organization. I'm bought in to building a more resilient organization, building a more inclusive organization, whatever the pieces were. But two levels up, they don't want to. What should I do?" And I'll just never forget. Simon said, "You quit and you go find somewhere else that wants you more." Right? So if I'm an HR executive coming to the executive table for the first time and they say, you know, "To hell with this," we don't believe that HR should be in a position of power, I think that's probably the wrong company and their loss, right? And it's a fairly privileged place to be able to say, "Okay, then quit."
Right.
But I've never found that tilting at windmills and trying to change people who don't want to change is useful, right? The advice BJ Fogg gave me years ago is find the people who already want what you have to offer and then just show them how.
Wow. I mean, that's something to really think about too. Of like, when is it, as Beth Steinberg, who's CPO at Chime, says, like, you sometimes just need to know when to put your badge down and walk away. And when is it a place where it really is challenging some fundamental truths that you have about yourself being challenged in a way that you need to. And when is it something where it's like, maybe I can make change, maybe I can convince them of something else and to keep going at it. And I think that is a fine line and something that gets explored quite a bit in our profession, because we get challenged a lot in this profession of like, what do I believe in, and do I believe the way that this company is doing it?
Yeah,
um, I know we have precious little time with you, and I want to be able to get to our accelerator round. I was just going to ask for one last question, which is any quick tips for HR pros who are trying to embed stories or storytelling more into their day to day? You mentioned practice. What are a couple of quick tips on the best ways to practice getting better at storytelling?
sure. It's fun because I still feel like that 8-year-old boy who was like very shyly bringing his peers to watch Lawrence of Arabia at my birthday party. I am often the loudest in the room I'm in. I'm always the most enthusiastic in any room I walk into, right? I'm never short energy. And at 8 years old and even at 18 years old, that was not true, right? So it would be easy to see Robin Zander today and say, oh, well, easy for you to say. And to be fair, I'm a white man in America. I've got a lot of things going for me. But I was a very shy kid, right? I was so hesitant to speak up, and it has been the practice of 2 decades of and deliberate practice to become the entrepreneur I am and to be able to sit in boardrooms and have conversations at an executive level and do so comfortably. Um, we've talked story framework, we've talked about practice, affect, right? I actually think that just being enthusiastic is a competitive advantage. Everyone likes being around somebody who is positive. Um, Practicing the specific of your stories, practicing the specific of your pitch, choosing what story to tell, and not telling a story for the first time when the stakes are high. Uh, the tempo of a story. If I'm telling the Steve Jobs story, right, I stood up and I'm like my jean pocket. There's pacing that matters a lot, right? When I speak more slowly, it's clear there's some significance to what I have to say, right? There's so many pieces of what I guess we could just call as executive presence. And even just by practicing those and getting incrementally better and not comparing yourself to the best in the world, but compared to who you were yesterday. There's a Mr. Beast, Jimmy Donaldson quote that I like a lot, which is he says, you know, if I look back on the video that we produced 2 weeks ago and I'm not ashamed, I'm not growing fast enough. I don't like the shame of that. I don't find shame to be a particularly good motivator for myself, but I publish a weekly newsletter called Snafu about reluctant sales, essentially. And if I look back, when I look back 3 months ago, I'm like, okay, I would write that very differently today, right? It's not exactly shame, but like I've improved as a writer from 3 months ago. And for all of us in our executive presence, in our storytelling, and our ability to sell, there's a, are you getting better? Is this important enough that you are practicing this deliberately, that you're getting better in whatever facet so that you can become more of the executive, of the leader that you want to do? And it doesn't have to be practice at work, right? I, I'm practicing, this is a little more nuanced, but I'm practicing Darija, which is Moroccan Arabic, with my dog. I'm not comfortable enough speaking Darija that I'm practicing it with humans, but I'm practicing it with my dog, right? If we are practicing storytelling, can we practice it in conversations with family? If you're practicing one of the ones that's been the hardest for me to learn is not trying to get people to do things that they don't want to do. I practice that with my family every day. It is so tempting to try to persuade one of my parents to do something that they have said specifically they don't want to do, and instead to acknowledge the reality of that. Right? So these are life skills that happen to be applicable at work and practicing them in whatever context they occur so that when push comes to shove, when the stakes are high, you are prepared.
Robin, we are about to lose you. So I want to make sure that our audience gets the benefit of our accelerator round question. So again, we'll try to give just the most valuable nuggets in the shortest time possible.
I
You've
I
you've
can I
sh
can stretch long too. I'm not in a hurry to.
you've shared you've dropped a lot of names. You've shared a lot of quotes. Where do you learn from? And most specifically, what sources would you recommend for our audience to learn from?
Learning is such a deep rabbit hole. Um, the thing I think about learning is follow a thread. Pick right if one name has come up today that's of interest, go research that person or that book or that idea, and and then go follow the leads from there. I mean, literally right here, I have a biography of P.T. Barnum, of Barnum and Bailey Circus that I'm reading right now, and I'm learning about the 1850s, as an era and the era that he started sort of long before he was known for the circus. So it's whatever is of interest to you that you are interested in, and go from there. I write a weekly newsletter about sales and persuasion. You can find that at joinsnafu.com, snafu, snafu.com. But for whatever elements of persuasion and storytelling in HR or at an executive level, it's find the things you're interested in, and take the next step.
Great. That's great. Um, I know you've called out that you're not an HR practitioner, but boy, you have been a part of this HR tech and high growth community in a big way for a long time. Would love to get your advice for how you might suggest our audience, our listeners, could accelerate their careers in today's environment.
Always keep learning.
Ties right back into find out what you're interested in and press the gas pedal. I love it.
Yeah.
You've mentioned the Responsive Conference, Zander Media, your newsletter, Snafu. Are there any other ways that you would recommend that our listeners get in touch with you?
I think that's the majority. Yeah, I run an annual conference about the future of work, and the weekly newsletter are probably the best ways to keep track.
Awesome. Robin, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of your insights and wisdom about storytelling. It was wonderful to get to know you and share that with our listeners.
Likewise, Jess, such a pleasure, Jess and Andrew, and congratulations on this podcast. It's you've got such an incredible network and so many ideas and resources to share. So I'm so excited that you're doing this.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.